So now that we have our tab-based navigation working, and we can mark items as favorites and see them under the Favorites tab, it's time to add this side drawer, which I mentioned earlier. A side drawer which we can open up to go to a filters screen on which we can set various filters which will then impact which meals we see when we select a category. And just like tabs, which we added with help of bottom navigation bar on Scaffold, such a side drawer is an absolutely common and standard feature and therefore very easy to add with Flutter. Indeed, it's again the Scaffold widget that allows us to add a drawer to this screen, because that's also important to understand. Side drawers are added on a per screen basis. If you want to have a button that opens the side drawer on a specific screen in the app bar, you have to add it to the scaffold of that screen. So here, if I want to have a side drawer on both tabs, I have to add the side drawer to the tabs screen scaffold. And that's exactly where I'm at in my code. So there on Scaffold, we can then add the drawer parameter. And as you can already see, you also got a couple of other drawer related parameters that allow you to basically configure the behavior of the drawer and listen to certain events. But here I'll simply add the drawer parameter, and this wants a widget in the end. A widget that will be presented as the drawer. Now for that, Flutter has the built-in drawer widget, which is simply a widget that's optimized for being shown as a side drawer. But since I'm about to add a lot of content to that drawer, I'll actually create a brand new widget, my own custom widget, in the widgets folder therefore, because this will now not act as a screen, but as the side drawer instead. And I'll name it main_drawer.dart. Of course, as always, all these names are up to you, but in this file, I'll then add a new class, main_drawer, and this class will extend stateless widget, because even though this drawer will then provide buttons that take us to different screens, will again perform this navigation with help of the navigator object and not by setting some state. Hence, the drawer widget can be stateless. Now in this drawer class, we therefore as always add the build method and also a constructor, main_drawer, where at the moment I only accept and forward the key, as we always do. And now here in the build method, I will return that built-in drawer widget. Now this drawer widget gives you a bunch of configuration options, like for example setting the background color of the drawer, or the color of the background shadow that will be displayed below the drawer, or with elevation you can basically define how much drop shadow you want to have behind the drawer. But here I'll simply set the child, which defines the content inside of the drawer. And as I mentioned, the drawer widget is already a widget that's optimized to be presented as a drawer, so it will, for example, automatically make sure that it takes the entire screen height, and so on. So here, as a child, I'll then add a column because I want to have multiple items above each other in that drawer. And for that, of course, we set our children here in this column, as we always do. And then the different children that I do want to set are basically a header at the top of the drawer, and then below that a couple of clickable or tappable items that take us to different screens. Now for the header, we can use the built-in drawer header widget, which is another widget optimized for its role. In this case, optimized for being used inside of a drawer to show some header, as you might guess, at the top of the drawer. Now, drawer header can be configured in different ways and accepts different parameters. And I will, for example, also soon add a decoration to it to style it, basically, and also add some padding, which is supported here with the padding parameter. And I'll start with that and give it a padding of 20 in all directions like this. And then in addition to this, I'll also re-add decoration and set this to a box decoration object, as we did many times before for other widgets as well in this course. And I'm doing this so that I can add a gradient here. And I guess that was the most common scenario where I used box decoration thus far in the course for adding gradients to widgets, and I'm doing the same here. Now the gradient is created as we always do it with the linear gradient class here provided by Flutter. And then we can set our colors and then also begin and end. Now for the colors, I'll use some colors from my theme with theme of context using this context object, which we get automatically in the build method. And then here I'll reach out to my color scheme and use the primary container as a starting color. And for the end color, I'll also use color scheme primary container, so I'll copy that, but then I'll add some opacity to it to have a slight gradient between the same colors, but where one color has some transparency. And then I'll begin with that gradient in the top left corner with alignment top left, and I'll end in the bottom right corner like this. And with that, I got some styling added to the drawer header. Of course, it also needs a child though, which simply defines the main content inside of this header. And for that here, I'll add a row as a child because I want to have multiple items next to each other inside of that drawer header. And the items I do want to have next to each other here are an icon and then a sized box to add some spacing and then some text. Now for the spacing, I'll use a width of 18 pixels. For the icon, I chose the fast food, which is a built-in icon, of course, that looks like this. And I'll actually change the size of this icon to make it quite big by assigning 48 pixels as a size. And I'll also change the color of this icon, and again use my theme for that to reach out to theme of context color scheme, and then there choose the primary color. Now for the text, I'll simply give it a text of cooking up, like this. And also set a style here where I will again use the theme, and then of course the text theme property on the theme, and there for the text theme object, to access the title large styling, but I want to adjust it a little bit, hence I'll add an exclamation mark to tell Dart that I know that title large will be defined in this theme, to then call copy with and override some settings, specifically the color, where I will again use the theme, and of course as always the color scheme thereafter, and then the primary color. So that's the content of this row, which in turn is the content of the header. And with that, before we add anything else, I want to see whether this drawer is displayed correctly and whether this header looks good by going back to tab start. And here for this drawer parameter on scaffold, I will add my main drawer widget here. And we can add const in front of this. Of course, we must make sure that main drawer Dart is imported in this tab start file. But with this import added and the drawer set on the scaffold as we're doing it here, we can save everything, make sure that the app is up and running. And if you go back to your app, you should now see this menu icon here in the top left corner, on Android at least. And if you tap it, you open up this drawer where you see this header that we added, which looks the way I want it to look. And if we tap on the background or we slide this in, we can close this drawer. So that works as it should, and that's awesome. And we can also access this from the favorites page because that's still part of the tabs page, though we cannot access it if we dive into a category. For example, there we have this back button as we want it. So this all works as intended. And therefore now the next step is to add some items to that drawer, some tappable items that take us to different screens. So in order to go to different screens, I'll go back to the main drawer here, and there below this drawer header in the children list of this column here, so here after drawer header, right before I close this list of children for the column, I will add more content. Specifically, I'll add the links to the different screens I want to support in this app. And for that, I'll use another built-in widget, which is not exclusive to the drawer, but which you can use in any list you might be outputting, and that would be the list tile widget. I haven't really used this widget a lot thus far, but it can be a great widget for outputting list content since it's simply optimized for bundling different pieces of information together in a single row. Here I'll use Flutter's list tile widget to output my drawer links. For that, the list tile widget accepts multiple parameters that offer you rich configuration options. And you can, for example, set a title here to add the main content of this list tile in the end. Any widget is accepted here. And here I'll simply go for the text widget to then output my different, drawer link texts. For example, meals for the first list item, so that this would be the list item that takes us back to this tabs screen, for example. So that's the title I'm setting here. And I'll add a style here, again, by reaching out to my theme. So from that theme, I'm going to grab some styling. Here, I'll not use title large, but instead title small, and see how that looks like. And then I'll set my color here, my text color, to on background. And I'll also override the font size and set it to 24. So with that, I set this text on this first list tile. That's not all I want to set though. I also want to add an icon in front of this text, essentially. And for that, we could set title to a row, where we then manually add an icon next to a text, but the list tile actually also gives us a leading parameter, which allows us to set a widget that will be presented at the beginning of this row, of this list item, so that this title comes after the leading widget. As I mentioned, list tile simply is a built-in widget that's optimized for outputting items in a list, so inside of a row that's part of a list. And leading allows us to add some widget that will be displayed at the start of that row. And here the leading widget I want to output is an icon. And for this meals item here, for this meals link, I'll use the built-in restaurant icon. I'll then also set the size of this icon to 26 and change the color of the icon and set that to theme of context, color scheme, on background, so the same color I used for my text down there. Now with that, we would be displaying one link in our drawer, but of course it wouldn't be useful if it wouldn't be tappable. And therefore, of course, besides adding leading and title, I'll add one last very important parameter to list tile, and that's the onTap parameter, which wants a function as a value. And later, we'll make sure that when this function gets triggered, we navigate to a different screen. So that's the first step. The next step is to copy this list tile and add a second one. But in this one here, we'll go to the filters screen, which we have yet to add. And I'll use a different icon here, the settings icon to be precise. But besides that, it's the same configuration as before. And therefore, of course, we could outsource this into a separate reusable widget, but here I'll just go with copy and pasting. And with that, I added the two items I want to have in that drawer. And if you now save that, you should be able to open that drawer and see these two items. And they are tappable, but of course at the moment nothing happens when I tap them because I haven't added any logic to those tap functions here. But that is what we'll do next.